This is the Secure Family Podcast. Welcome, friend. I'm Andy Murphy, the host and founder of The Secure Dad. This show is all about empowering parents to protect themselves and their family. I believe that security is the foundation of happiness. I want your family to be safe and secure. The information I share on this podcast is for general information purposes only. My goal is to empower you to make safer decisions for yourself and your family, because our safety is our own responsibility. In this episode, I want to discuss the best safety tip that anyone can ever give you. I've used this hundreds of times in my life, and it has made me a better person, and I want to share this tip with you today. All of that and more coming up on the Secure Family Podcast. As we start 2025, it's time to make a commitment, one to take control of our personal data. Our information is everywhere: names, phone numbers, addresses, even work history. And it's all being bought and sold by data brokers. These companies profit off of our personal details while leaving us exposed to privacy risks, scams, and even identity theft. That's why I personally use Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal information from hundreds of data brokers. With data breaches and cyber threats on the rise, now is the perfect time to take action and protect yourself for the year ahead. Start this year by reclaiming your digital privacy with Delete Me. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/dad and use the promo code DAD at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/dad and enter the code DAD at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/dad, code DAD. Before we get started, I want to talk about the recent changes to the show. Yes, this show was known as the Secure Dad Podcast. In fact, I did 308 episodes under that name, and they are all still available here for you. But after a few hundred shows, I decided that I wanted to freshen up the podcast. So I did. Thank you for listening and supporting me, and I'm excited about what we're going to do together in 2025. I remember being a newly married man, and I had a troubling thought one night. Maybe you've had something similar happen to you before. This thought kept me awake, and I wasn't able to immediately solve it. My thought was this: if someone breaks into our home right now, I don't know what to do. As I lay there looking at the dark ceiling, there was this moment of truth for me. I had to think, do I rely on the fact that I believe that we live in a safe neighborhood? Do I wish upon a star that a home invasion will never happen to us? Or do I do something about it? The reality is that many people have this thought and dismiss it with, "Oh, it'll never happen to me." Hoping that something won't happen to you does not affect the outcome at all. It's your actions that will help determine the result, not wishing that trouble is just going to pass you by. Fear actually needs to be explored. It needs to be addressed. When you can walk through the worst-case scenario with logical steps, you'll discover that 1, you are much braver than you think, and 2, that looking at the fear and preparing for it will actually make you safer. As long as the fear is grounded in reality, you can prepare yourself and your family for what to do if things go sideways. We really, truly need to understand what fear is. Despite what horror movies tell us, fear is actually a useful survival signal. Fear has kept our species alive since the beginning. Your caveman ancestors looked at a smoldering volcano and said, "We're going to have to move." And because of that, because they faced that fear, you and I are here today. Self-defense expert Tony Blauer created a program called No Fear. That's KNOW. I was blessed to be able to take his course and then actually talk to him about it on an episode of this podcast. Tony reminds us that fear is an essential signal that keeps us safe and that we have to look at fear and own it in order to survive. We need to embrace fear for what it actually is, this essential survival signal, and work with it to protect ourselves. Don't ever downplay that little voice inside you that indicates something just doesn't feel right. Your intuition and your fear will actually guide you to a safer existence. Is it uncomfortable? Absolutely, it's uncomfortable. But life is uncomfortable, and we need to respond to that and know that life isn't always going to be comfortable. Now, as a single guy, I had a plan if somebody broke into my apartment. Now that I was a married man in a home, things were very different. I must now account for new surroundings and what role my wife would play in the event that someone would break in. So instead of trying to, push that thought out of my head, I began to think about it, and I began to learn what to do. Facing your fear, looking at what makes you uncomfortable, and planning for it is the best way to keep yourself and your loved ones safe. And that, my friend, is the best safety tip I can ever give you. No one joyfully sits and thinks about what they'd do if their child started to choke. We don't text our friends and brag about how good our fire escape plans are. Believe it or not, I don't even do that. And we certainly don't get excited about what to do if someone attacks us in a parking lot. All of these by nature are the worst case scenarios that we really don't want to dwell on. So instead of being fearful, I embrace the problem and I try to reverse engineer the worst case scenario. My whole life I have been what we'll call gifted with something called the adversarial mindset. And that's just fancy talk for thinking like a criminal. I'm always looking for loopholes and exploits that others may not see, but I'm happily on the good side. Using my adversarial mindset, I was able to break down how somebody would typically break into my home. Instead of starting outside, I actually began inside with the fear that somebody would be standing over me as I slept. Creepy, right? And then I made plans to keep the intruder out of my bedroom, and then out of my home, to finally making the outside of my home so unappealing for a robbery that no one looking for a quick score would even consider my house. So I took this fear of waking up to an intruder standing over me as I slept, and I used it to create a home that was safer. My wife and I were prepared, and we were empowered to take control of our own safety. I first had this life-changing revelation when I was in high school. The day after the tragedy at Columbine High School in Colorado, my life and my thought process changed. While I was hundreds of miles away from the shooting, it changed the course of the lives of so many kids going to school at that time, including me. I remember sitting in my classroom the next day, and I had the realization that if one of my classmates were to start shooting in this room, there would be no way that the school resource officer could get to us fast enough. It was then that I had the realization that my safety was my own responsibility. Don't get me wrong, our brave first responders will be there when we need them, but we have to survive long enough to call them and for them to respond. So for a while, we are going to be on our own, or depending on what state you live in today, the police may not even show up at all. If no one has ever told you before, you now know that we are responsible for ourselves, and as parents, we are responsible for the safety of our family. Own this, friend. Own the fear. Own the uncertainty. Your first plan does not have to be perfect. You're just going to improve on it as you learn. I do this all the time. General George Patton once said, "A good plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan next week." When somebody kicks in your door is not the time to make a plan. It's time to act. Give yourself and your family all the tools that they need to avoid this situation or deal with it if you have to. The last thing you ever want to happen is for a loved one to freeze in the face of danger because they don't know what to do. It's up to you to teach them how to look out for themselves and for their family. If you're not sure what to do if somebody breaks into your home, I have you covered. My Amazon best-selling book, Home Security: The Secure Dad's Guide, walks you through a layered home defense strategy. This strategy is for all skill levels, no matter where you live. There's a link to this book in today's show notes. I want you to know that you need to understand what fear is. It is a survival skill that all of us are born with. While fear is uncomfortable, it's absolutely manageable. Embrace it for what it is and address it. When you truly know what fear is, you understand that it's not a weakness. It's actually your key to living a safer, happier life. Well, this concludes this episode of the Secure Family Podcast. Thank you, friend, for listening. Take back your privacy and personal data with help from Delete Me. Get 20% off a privacy plan when using the code DAD at checkout. Delete Me is the official data removal service of the Secure Dad. If you want to know more about the Secure Dad, visit thesecuredad.com. There you'll find free downloads, books, podcast episodes, and a whole lot more. The best way to stay informed, though, is with my email newsletter. There's a link for you to sign up in today's show notes. I want to say a special thank you to a few folks who helped me make this transition. So a big thanks to Brian Marin, Dylan Schmidt, Josh Summers, and Jeremy Kay. I'm Andy Murphy, reminding you that fear is a survival signal. Listen to it and use it to make yourself a better, safer person. I'll see you next week.